The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store, and Cecilia Barrett stepped down into the dusty street of Williams, Arizona territory, her legs trembling from 3 days of bone-rattling travel. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as she smoothed her travel-worn skirt and adjusted the carpet bag clutched in her gloved hands, her heart pounding with equal parts hope and dread about this new beginning so far from everything she had ever known. It was the summer of 1882, and Cecilia had traveled all the way from Sweden with nothing but her late aunt's inheritance and a promise of work at the Williams schoolhouse. At 22 years old, she had never been more terrified or determined. Her English was serviceable, learned painstakingly from books and her aunt's patient tutoring, but her Swedish accent remained thick as molasses, wrapping itself around every word she spoke. The driver tossed her trunk down from the top of the coach, and she flinched at the cloud of dust it raised. A group of men lounging outside the saloon across the street had already turned their attention her way, their eyes assessing, their mouths curved in smirks that made her skin crawl. "Thank you, sir," she said to the driver, her accent turning the words into something that sounded more like "tank you, sir." One of the men across the street let out a bark of laughter. "You hear that, boys? Sounds like a wounded goose trying to talk." Heat flooded Cecilia's cheeks as the other men joined in the laughter. She kept her chin high, refusing to let them see how their mockery stung. This was not the first time her accent had drawn ridicule, and she suspected it would not be the last. She had learned to build walls around her heart, to expect cruelty rather than kindness. "Need some help with that trunk, miss?" The voice came from behind her, deep and warm like honey poured over cornbread. Cecilia turned to find a tall man standing a respectful distance away, his worn cowboy hat shadowing eyes that looked kind even in the harsh sunlight. He was lean and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. A well-used lariat hung from his belt, and his boots were scuffed from hard work. She judged him to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27. "I would appreciate that," she said carefully, bracing herself for the inevitable reaction to her accent. But his expression did not change except to offer a gentle smile. He stepped forward and hefted her trunk with ease, muscles flexing beneath his worn cotton shirt. "Where are you headed?" "The boarding house. Mrs. Henderson's place, if you know it." "I do. It is just down this way." He started walking, and she fell into step beside him, acutely aware of the stares following them down the street. "Thank you for your kindness," she said quietly. He glanced at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "No need to thank me for doing what is right. I am Quinn Xavier, by the way. Most folks just call me Quinn." "Cecilia Barrett." She hesitated, then added, "I am here to teach at the school." "Is that so? The children will be lucky to have you. The last teacher left 6 months ago, and they have been without proper schooling since." They walked in companionable silence for a moment, passing storefronts and businesses that made up the heart of Williams. The town sat along the railroad line, and Cecilia could see the tracks gleaming in the distance. Williams was smaller than she had expected, but it had a certain rugged charm that spoke of determination and survival. "You came a long way," Quinn said, not making it a question. "Sweden. It is across the ocean." "I know where Sweden is," he said, and there was no condescension in his tone, only gentle amusement. "That is a brave journey to make alone. I had little choice. My parents died when I was young, and my aunt raised me. She passed last year and left me enough money to make a new start. There was nothing left for me there." She did not know why she was telling this stranger such personal details, but something about Quinn Xavier invited confidence. He had an easy way about him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time in days. They reached the boarding house, a two-story structure with a wide porch and curtained windows. Quinn set her trunk down gently by the front steps. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal a plump woman with graying hair and a warm smile. "You must be Miss Barrett. We have been expecting you. I am Martha Henderson." The older woman bustled forward, taking Cecilia's hands in her own. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted from your journey." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson." Cecilia turned to Quinn. "And thank you again, Mr. Xavier." "Quinn," he corrected gently. "Just Quinn." He tipped his hat to her, and their eyes met for a brief moment that seemed to stretch into something more. "Welcome to Williams, Miss Barrett. I hope you will be happy here." Then he was walking away, his long strides carrying him back down the street, and Cecilia found herself watching until he disappeared around a corner. "That is a good man," Martha said, following Cecilia's gaze. "Quinn Xavier works the ranch just outside of town. He has been here about 5 years now, came from Texas after his family was killed in a Comanche raid. He does not talk about it much, but you can see the sadness in his eyes sometimes." Cecilia's heart clenched at the thought of Quinn carrying such a burden of loss. She understood that kind of grief all too well. Martha led her inside and up the stairs to a small but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the main street. After the older woman left her to settle in, Cecilia sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. She had made it. She was here. Now came the hard part, building a life in this strange new place. The next morning, Cecilia walked to the schoolhouse with a mixture of excitement and nervousness churning in her stomach. The building was a simple one-room structure on the edge of town, with wooden benches and a slate board at the front. She spent the morning cleaning and organizing, preparing for the students who would begin arriving the following Monday. She was sweeping the front steps when a shadow fell across her path. Looking up, she saw 3 women standing there, their fine dresses and elaborate hairstyles marking them as the wives of prosperous townsmen. "So you are the new teacher," the tallest one said, her tone making it clear this was not a friendly visit. "I am Mrs. Cordelia Whitmore, and this is Mrs. Alice Porter and Mrs. Elizabeth Crane. We are on the school board." "It is a pleasure to meet you," Cecilia said, setting aside her broom. "I hope that I will meet your expectations." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes narrowed at her accent. "Where exactly are you from?" "Sweden, madam." "I see." The woman exchanged glances with her companions. "And you believe yourself qualified to teach American children, despite your obvious difficulty with the English language." The words struck like a slap, but Cecilia kept her voice steady. "I speak English fluently, madam. I also speak Swedish and can read Latin. I have certificates of education from my school in Sweden." "Nevertheless," Mrs. Whitmore said coldly, "we have concerns about whether children will be able to understand you properly. That accent of yours is quite pronounced." "The children will understand me just fine," Cecilia said, fighting to keep her composure. "I assure you I am quite capable." Mrs. Porter, a thin woman with a pinched expression, spoke up. "Perhaps we made a mistake hiring someone sight unseen. Mrs. Whitmore, we should discuss this with the other board members." "Wait," Cecilia said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please give me a chance. Let me teach for 1 month, and if the children are not learning, if their parents complain, then I will leave without protest." Mrs. Whitmore considered this, her lips pursed. "Very well, 1 month, but we will be watching closely." The 3 women swept away, leaving Cecilia trembling on the steps. She sank down onto the wood, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She had come so far, given up everything, and already they wanted to send her away because of how she spoke. "Do not let those harpies get to you." Cecilia looked up to find a young woman about her own age standing at the bottom of the steps. She had dark hair and friendly eyes, and she carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I am sorry," Cecilia said, wiping quickly at her eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore and her cronies. They think they run this town, and I suppose in some ways they do, but that does not make them right." The woman climbed the steps and held out her hand. "I am Sarah Matthews. My husband owns the general store. I heard we had a new teacher and thought I would bring you some lunch." "That is very kind." Cecilia took the offered hand, grateful for the warmth in the other woman's grip. "I am Cecilia Barrett. I know. Small town, word travels fast." Sarah sat down beside her and uncovered the basket, revealing fresh bread, cheese, and apple slices. "Do not worry about Mrs. Whitmore. Her daughter was hoping to get the teaching position, but she has the brains of a turnip and the personality to match." Despite everything, Cecilia found herself laughing. "You are honest. Life is too short for anything else. Now eat. You look like you could use a friend, and I have decided that friend is going to be me." Over lunch, Sarah told her about Williams, about the people who lived there, about the rhythms of life in this small town that served as a stopping point for the railroad. She pointed out which families were kind and which to avoid, which shopkeepers would give fair prices and which would try to cheat her. "And Quinn Xavier?" Cecilia asked, trying to sound casual. "What can you tell me about him?" Sarah's eyes lit up with knowing amusement. "Met him already, have you? He is one of the good ones. Works harder than any 3 men combined, never causes trouble, helps out when folks need it. He keeps to himself mostly, lives in a small house on the ranch where he works. The owner, Mr. Dalton, treats him well. Quinn has been saving money, hoping to buy his own place someday." Mrs. Henderson mentioned his family. Sarah's expression sobered. "Terrible business. His whole family was killed when he was 21. Parents, 2 sisters, younger brother. He survived because he was out checking the cattle when the raid happened. Came back to find them all gone. I cannot imagine carrying that kind of pain." Cecilia's heart ached for Quinn, for the lonely young man who had lost everything and somehow found the strength to keep going, to remain kind in a world that had shown him such cruelty. The following Monday, Cecilia stood at the front of the schoolroom as children filed in with their parents. She had spent the weekend preparing lessons and arranging the space, and now her moment of truth had arrived. There were 15 students in total, ranging from 6 to 14 years old. She introduced herself, and immediately she saw some of the children exchange glances at her accent. But she pressed forward, beginning with a simple lesson about the alphabet and rating. To her relief, the children seemed to understand her perfectly well. The younger ones were curious about where she came from, and she told them a bit about Sweden, about the long winters and the midnight sun. The day went better than she had dared hope, but as parents came to collect their children, she saw Mrs. Whitmore standing outside, speaking in low tones with several mothers. Their glances toward Cecilia were not friendly. As the last child left, a boy of about 8 lingered by her desk. "I like your voice, Miss Barrett," he said shyly. "It sounds like a song." "Thank you, Thomas," she said, remembering his name from the roll call. "That is very sweet of you to say." He smiled and scampered out, and Cecilia felt a small spark of hope. If she could reach the children, perhaps that would be enough. Over the next 2 weeks, she threw herself into teaching with everything she had. She stayed late preparing lessons, arrived early to warm the room in the cool mornings, and worked tirelessly to make learning engaging for her students. Most of the children responded well, their initial curiosity about her accent fading as they became absorbed in their lessons. But the adults were another matter. She felt their stares when she walked through town, heard the whispers that fell silent when she passed. "Mrs. Whitmore made a point of visiting the schoolhouse regularly, always finding something to criticize, whether it was Cecilia's penmanship on the board or the way she explained long division. One afternoon, Cecilia stopped at the general store to buy supplies. Sarah was behind the counter and greeted her warmly, but several other women in the store fell silent at her entrance. As she browsed the shelves, she overheard Mrs. Crane speaking to another woman in the next aisle. "I simply do not understand why we must tolerate that ridiculous accent. How are our children supposed to learn proper English when their teacher sounds like she has a mouth full of marbles? It is shameful," the other woman agreed. "My Henry came home the other day trying to talk like her. I put a stop to that right quick." Cecilia's hands trembled as she reached for a box of chalk. She wanted to leave, to run back to the boarding house and hide, but she forced herself to stay, to complete her purchases with dignity. When she brought her items to the counter, Sarah rang them up with an apologetic look. "Ignore them," Sarah whispered. "You are doing a wonderful job." "Am I?" Cecilia's voice cracked slightly. "All I hear is how terrible my accent is, how I am ruining their children." "You are not ruining anyone. Those women are just small-minded and mean-spirited." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Give it time." But time seemed to be making things worse, not better. The next Sunday, Cecilia attended church for the first time since arriving in Williams. She slipped into a pew at the back, hoping to go unnoticed, but she felt the weight of judgmental stares throughout the service. After the benediction, she tried to leave quickly, but Mrs. Whitmore intercepted her on the church steps. "Miss Barrett, a word." The woman's voice was cold. "Several parents have expressed concerns about their children's education. Your teaching methods are questionable, and your accent continues to be a disruption." "What teaching methods?" Cecilia demanded, her frustration finally breaking through. "I follow standard curriculum. The children are learning. They can read better than when they started. Their arithmetic has improved." "Do not raise your voice to me," Mrs. Whitmore said sharply. "We will be having a school board meeting at the end of the month to discuss your continued employment. I suggest you prepare yourself for the likelihood that we will be seeking a replacement." The woman walked away, leaving Cecilia standing on the church steps feeling as though the ground had dropped out from beneath her. 4 weeks. She had made it 4 weeks, and already they were preparing to dismiss her. She walked back to the boarding house in a daze, barely noticing where her feet carried her until she found herself at the edge of town, near the corrals where horses were kept. She stopped, realizing she had walked too far, and turned to head back when she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Barrett, are you all right?" Quinn was leaning against a fence post, his hat pushed back on his head, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He must have been working with the horses, and concern was written clearly across his face. "I am fine," she said automatically, then her composure crumbled. "No, I am not fine. I am failing. They hate me. They hate how I sound, and they are going to dismiss me, and I have nowhere else to go." Before she knew what was happening, Quinn had crossed the distance between them and was standing close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Who hates you?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Everyone. The women of the town, Mrs. Whitmore. They think I sound ridiculous. They say I am not fit to teach their children because of my accent." A tear escaped down her cheek and she wiped at it angrily. "Maybe they are right. Maybe I was foolish to come here." Quinn was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he spoke, and his words were soft but firm, each one landing with the weight of absolute truth. "Your voice is the sweetest sound I know." Cecilia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Your voice?" Quinn repeated, meeting her eyes steadily. "It is beautiful. The way you speak, the music in your words, it is like nothing I have ever heard before. Those women are fools if they cannot hear it. Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever suggested that her accent was anything but a flaw to be overcome or hidden. And the way Quinn was looking at her, with such sincerity and warmth, made something deep in her chest begin to unfurl like a flower turning toward the sun. "You do not mean that," she whispered. "I do not say things I do not mean." He took a small step closer, and she could smell leather and hay and something else, something uniquely him. "I have been meaning to stop by the schoolhouse to see how you were settling in, but I did not want to be presumptuous. The truth is, I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I met you." "Quinn," she breathed, his name feeling natural on her tongue. "I know this is forward and you can tell me to mind my own business, but I would very much like to call on you properly, if you would allow it." Joy bloomed in Cecilia's chest, bright and warm and entirely unexpected. "I would like that very much." Quinn's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the desert. "Would you take a walk with me? I could show you around the ranch. It is beautiful this time of evening." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and he offered his arm. She took it, and they walked together along the fence line, past the corrals where horses whinnied and stamped. Quinn pointed out different landmarks, told her about the work he did on the ranch, the cattle drives and roundups, the long days in the saddle under the Arizona sun. But mostly they talked about themselves, about their lives and dreams and the paths that had led them both to Williams. Quinn spoke about his family, his voice rough with old grief, and Cecilia told him about her parents, about her aunt who had given her everything and asked for nothing in return. "She would have liked you," Cecilia said as they paused at the top of a small rise overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and deep purple. "She always said I should find someone who saw past the surface to the heart beneath." "And what is in your heart, Cecilia?" Quinn asked, turning to face her. She considered the question, really thought about it. "Hope," she said finally. "Despite everything, despite the mockery and the rejection, I still hope for something better. I still believe there is a place for me in this world." "There is," Quinn said firmly. "Right here." As they walked back toward town, the sky deepening to twilight around them, Cecilia felt lighter than she had in weeks. Quinn's presence beside her was solid and comforting, and when they reached the boarding house, he took her hand in his. "May I see you again? Perhaps Saturday we could have supper together." "I would like that very much," she said. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it and tipped his hat. "Good night, Cecilia." "Good night, Quinn." She watched him walk away, his silhouette fading into the gathering darkness, and her heart was full in a way it had not been in a very long time. The rest of the week passed in a blur of teaching and stolen moments thinking about Quinn. The criticism from the townspeople continued, but it seemed to matter less now. She had an ally, someone who saw value in her, who thought her voice was sweet rather than strange. Saturday arrived, and Cecilia dressed with care in her best dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. She arranged her blonde hair carefully, pinning it up in a style that was both practical and becoming. When Quinn arrived at the boarding house, his eyes widened with appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said simply. They walked to the small restaurant attached to the hotel, one of the few establishments in Williams that served proper sit-down meals. As they entered, Cecilia was acutely aware of the stares that followed them, the whispers that started up in their wake. Quinn seemed oblivious to it all, or perhaps he simply did not care. He held her chair for her and took his seat across the small table, his attention focused entirely on her. They ordered roast beef and potatoes, and as they waited for their food, they talked about everything and nothing. Quinn told her about a calf that had been born that week, about how the mother had been so protective they could barely get near enough to check on the baby. Cecilia told him about young Thomas, and how he had written a story about a dragon that she thought showed real creativity. "You care about those children," Quinn observed. "That is clear in how you speak about them." "I do. They deserve a good education, a chance to make something of themselves. I only wish their parents could see that I am capable of giving them that." "They will. Give it time." Their food arrived, and as they ate, Cecilia became aware of a commotion near the entrance to the restaurant. Mrs. Whitmore had entered with her husband, a portly man who ran the bank. The woman's eyes landed on Cecilia and Quinn, and her expression turned to stone. She marched over to their table, her husband trailing behind, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Xavier, I am surprised to see you keeping company with Miss Barrett." Quinn set down his fork carefully, his expression pleasant but his eyes hard. "Why is that surprising, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Well, I would have thought a respectable young man such as yourself would be more selective in his associations. Miss Barrett's position in this town is quite precarious at the moment." "The only thing precarious," Quinn said, his voice deceptively mild, "is your sense of Christian charity, madam." Mrs. Whitmore gasped. "How dare you speak to me that way?" "I dare because someone needs to. Miss Barrett is an excellent teacher and a fine woman, and the only thing wrong with her is that she does not fit into your narrow view of how people should be. That is your failing, not hers." Several other diners had stopped eating to watch the confrontation. Mr. Whitmore tugged at his wife's arm. "Cordelia, let us go sit down." But Mrs. Whitmore was not finished. She turned her venom on Cecilia. "You should be ashamed of yourself, using your feminine wiles to manipulate good men into defending you. It will not save your position." "That is enough." Quinn stood, his chair scraping back. He was not a violent man, but there was steel in his voice that made Mrs. Whitmore take a step back. "You will not speak to her that way. Not now, not ever. And if you have complaints about her teaching, I suggest you actually visit the schoolhouse and see what a fine job she is doing instead of relying on gossip and prejudice." Mrs. Whitmore's face had gone red. "We will see about this. Come along, Harold." She swept out of the restaurant, her husband hurrying after her, and slowly the other diners returned to their meals. Quinn sat back down, and Cecilia realized her hands were shaking. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." His expression softened. "I am sorry if I made things more difficult for you." "You made them better," she said quietly. "You stood up for me when no one else would. I will not forget that." His hand reached across the table and covered hers. "I will always stand up for you, Cecilia. I promise you that." They finished their meal, and as they walked back through town, Quinn told her about a place he wanted to show her. "It is not far, just outside of town. There is a creek there and cottonwood trees. It is peaceful. Would you like to see it?" She agreed, and they walked through the gathering dusk to a spot where a small creek ran through a grove of trees. The water babbled over rocks, and the trees rustled gently in the evening breeze. Quinn helped her down to sit on a large flat rock near the water's edge, and he sat beside her. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," he said, "when the memories get too heavy." "What do you remember?" she asked gently. "You do not have to tell me if it is too painful." Quinn was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the water. "I remember my mother singing while she cooked. I remember my youngest sister laughing. She had this laugh that was infectious. You could not help but smile when you heard it. I remember my father teaching me to rope cattle, his patience when I kept missing. And I remember coming home and finding them all gone and feeling like my whole world had ended." Cecilia's throat tightened with unshed tears. "I am so sorry. For a long time I was angry. Angry at God, angry at the world, angry at myself for not being there. I thought about giving up, about just letting myself fade away. But then I realized that would be dishonoring their memory. They would want me to live to find joy again. So I came here, started over, tried to build something new. You have done that, Cecilia said. You have built a life. You are respected, valued. But lonely, Quinn admitted. I have been lonely for a long time, until I met you. He turned to face her, and in the fading light, his expression was open and vulnerable. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I feel something when I am with you. Something I have not felt since I lost my family. Hope, connection, the possibility of happiness. I feel it too, Cecilia whispered. You make me feel seen, Quinn, not judged, not mocked, just seen for who I truly am. He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. You are extraordinary, Cecilia Barrett. Never let anyone make you believe otherwise. Then he was leaning in, and she was meeting him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. I should get you back before Mrs. Henderson sends out a search party, Quinn said, standing and offering his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet, and they walked back to town hand in hand. At the boarding house, Quinn kissed her once more, a gentle press of lips that left her breathless. I will see you tomorrow. He asked. Yes, come by after church if you like. We could take another walk. I would like that very much. Cecilia floated up to her room, her heart singing. She had come to Williams expecting hardship and struggle, and she had found both. But she had also found something unexpected, something precious. She had found Quinn. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments with Quinn. He came by the schoolhouse some afternoons after the children had left, helping her clean up or repair things that needed fixing. They took long walks on Saturdays, exploring the area around Williams, and on Sundays after church, they would sit together, Quinn deflecting any negative comments directed Cecilia's way. Word of their courtship spread through town, as such things always did. Some people seemed pleased, like Sarah and Martha and a few other kind souls. But others, led by Mrs. Whitmore, were scandalized that Quinn would attach himself to someone so unsuitable. The school board meeting loomed, set for the last Friday of September. Cecilia tried not to think about it, tried to focus on her students and her teaching, but the worry gnawed at her. What would she do if they dismissed her? She had spent most of her inheritance on the journey here and her boarding fees. She had little left to start over somewhere else. The Thursday before the meeting, Cecilia kept the students late to practice a recitation she had been teaching them. It was a poem by Longfellow, and the children had been working hard to memorize it. She was just dismissing them when the door opened and several parents entered, led by Mrs. Whitmore. I do hope we are not interrupting, Mrs. Whitmore said, though her tone suggested she did not care if they were. We wanted to observe your teaching methods before tomorrow's meeting. Cecilia's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. The children were just leaving for the day. We have finished our lessons. Nevertheless, we would like to see you teach. Children, sit back down. The students looked to Cecilia uncertainly. She nodded, giving them what she hoped was a reassuring smile, and they slowly returned to their seats. Cecilia's mind raced, trying to decide what to do. Finally, she decided to continue with what they had been working on. All right, class, let us continue with our recitation. Who would like to begin? Young Thomas raised his hand eagerly, and Cecilia nodded to him. He stood and began reciting the poem, his young voice clear and confident. When he stumbled over a word, Cecilia gently prompted him, pronouncing it carefully. He repeated it correctly and continued. One by one, the other children took their turns. Some were hesitant, others confident, but all of them had clearly been working hard. Cecilia felt a surge of pride watching them. These were good children, eager to learn, and she had been helping them do just that. When the last child finished, Cecilia turned to the adults standing at the back of the room. As you can see, the children are learning well. They can recite poetry. They are improving their reading and arithmetic skills. Mrs. Whitmore's expression had not softened. And yet their pronunciation is suffering. Half of them are starting to sound like you. They sound like children learning to speak properly, Cecilia said, fighting to keep her voice level. If they pick up slight inflections from me, that is normal. It will fade as they are exposed to more speakers. One of the other mothers spoke up. I think they sound fine. My daughter has learned more in the past month than she did all last year with no teacher at all. Mine too, another parent agreed. I do not understand what the problem is, Mrs. Whitmore's jaw tightened. The problem is maintaining standards. The standard of education or the standard of prejudice. The voice came from the doorway, and everyone turned to see Quinn standing there, still dusty from a day's work. Because from where I stand, the only failing here is yours, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Xavier, this is not your concern. It is when you are treating a good woman poorly for no reason other than your own narrow-mindedness. Quinn walked into the room, his presence seeming to fill the space. I have been listening to you and your friends tear down Miss Barrett for weeks now. She works harder than any teacher this town has had. She cares about these children, and all you can focus on is how she sounds. Our concerns are legitimate. Your concerns are rooted in ugliness. Quinn's voice was hard. You do not like that she is different, so you are trying to drive her out, but I will not stand by and watch it happen. Mrs. Crane spoke up. Are you planning to marry her, Mr. Xavier? Is that what this is about? The question hung in the air, and Cecilia's breath caught. It was too soon, too fast. They had only been courting for a few weeks. But Quinn did not hesitate. If she will have me, yes. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Cecilia stared at Quinn, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. He met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw certainty and tenderness and fierce determination. Quinn, she breathed. He crossed to her in 3 long strides. I know this is sudden. I know we have not courted long by conventional standards. But I know my own heart, Cecilia. I know that I love you. I know that I want to build a life with you, here in Williams or anywhere else you want to go. And I will not let these people drive you away. Tears were streaming down Cecilia's face now, but they were tears of joy. I love you too. Yes, Quinn. Yes, I will marry you. He swept her into his arms, kissing her soundly, and the children erupted in cheers and applause. Even some of the parents were smiling, caught up in the romance of the moment. Mrs. Whitmore, however, looked apoplectic. This is highly inappropriate. This is a place of learning, not a romantic spectacle. Perhaps if you focused more on love and less on judgment, you would be happier, Quinn said, still holding Cecilia close. He looked down at her, and his smile was brilliant. Come on, let us get out of here. Cecilia nodded, and hand in hand, they walked out of the schoolhouse, leaving the shocked onlookers behind. Once they were outside in the afternoon sun, Cecilia started laughing, giddy with relief and joy and disbelief at what had just happened. Did you really just propose to me in front of Mrs. Whitmore and half the school board? I did, Quinn grinned, looking pleased with himself. I've been planning to ask you soon anyway. She just forced my hand. I hope you do not mind. Mind, Quinn, it was perfect, dramatic and impulsive and perfect. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. I love you so much. I love you too. He kissed her again, soft and lingering. We should probably make plans. I do not have much, but I have been saving money. I can buy us a small piece of land, build us a house. It will not be fancy, but it will be ours. I do not need fancy. I just need you. They walked through town, making plans and dreaming aloud, and by the time they reached the boarding house, they had decided to marry as soon as possible. Martha Henderson nearly fell over when they told her the news, but she recovered quickly and pulled Cecilia into a warm hug. "I am so happy for you, dear. Quinn is a good man, one of the best. You two will be very happy together." Word of the engagement spread through Williams like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew that Quinn Xavier had proposed to the Swedish schoolteacher in front of Mrs. Whitmore. The reactions were mixed, but there was a decided shift in sentiment. Perhaps it was the romance of it all, or perhaps Quinn's passionate defense had made people reconsider their hasty judgments. Either way, Cecilia found herself receiving more smiles and fewer cold stares as she walked through town. The school board meeting that evening was tense. Mrs. Whitmore argued passionately for Cecilia's dismissal, citing her accent and unconventional methods. But other parents spoke up in Cecilia's defense. They talked about how their children were thriving, how excited they were about learning, how they came home talking about the interesting things Miss Barrett had taught them. In the end, the vote was 5-2 in favor of keeping Cecilia on as teacher. Mrs. Whitmore stormed out of the meeting, but Cecilia barely noticed. She was staying. She could continue teaching, continue building a life here. Quinn was waiting outside the meeting hall, and when she emerged with a smile on her face, he swept her up and spun her around. "I knew it. I knew they would see reason. It was close," she admitted, "but we won. We did indeed." They set their wedding date for mid-October, giving them just 3 weeks to prepare. It was a whirlwind of activity. Sarah helped Cecilia find fabric for a wedding dress, and then sat with her in the evenings as they sewed it together. Martha helped plan a small reception. Quinn worked extra hours to save more money and began negotiating with Mr. Dalton about a plot of land he could purchase. The land Quinn bought was beautiful, 20 acres just outside Williams with a small creek running through it and views of the surrounding mountains. It came with a tiny cabin that had been abandoned for years, and Quinn spent every spare moment fixing it up, making it livable. Cecilia helped when she could, and slowly the cabin transformed into something that felt like a home. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Cecilia woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. Sarah and Martha came to help her dress, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress was simple but lovely, made of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was pinned up with small flowers woven through it. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, wiping at her eyes. "Quinn is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Cecilia replied softly. The wedding was held at the small church, and despite the short notice, it seemed half the town turned out. Cecilia saw friendly faces, people who had come to accept her, to see past her accent to the person beneath. Mrs. Whitmore was notably absent, but Cecilia did not care. This day was about her and Quinn and the life they were beginning together. Quinn stood at the front of the church looking handsome in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes fixed on the door where Cecilia would enter. When she walked down the aisle on Mr. Dalton's arm, the man having kindly offered to give her away, Quinn's face transformed with joy and love. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They spoke their vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and told Quinn he could kiss his bride, Quinn pulled Cecilia close and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. They walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, and outside the church, people threw rice and called out congratulations. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing. Cecilia danced with Quinn, his arms strong around her, and she felt a happiness so complete it was almost frightening. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked, his lips close to her ear as they swayed to the music. "That I am happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "That I am grateful I came to Williams despite everything." "I am grateful too. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Cecilia Xavier." She smiled at the sound of her new name, Cecilia Xavier. It felt right, felt like coming home. As the sun set, Quinn and Cecilia slipped away from the reception and rode out to their new home. The cabin looked cozy in the twilight, smoke curling from the chimney where Quinn had laid a fire earlier. He helped her down from the horse and carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. Inside, the cabin was small but clean. There was a bed in one corner, a table and chairs, a stove, a few shelves for their belongings. It was not much, but it was theirs. Quinn set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you sure about this? About me, about this life?" "I have never been more sure of anything," she said firmly. "I love you, Quinn. I want to build a life with you right here." He kissed her then, and it was different from their previous kisses, deeper and more passionate, full of promise and desire. They moved to the bed, helping each other out of their wedding clothes, and came together with a tenderness and love that made Cecilia's heart sing. Later, lying in Quinn's arms with the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls, Cecilia felt a peace she had never known. This was home. This was where she belonged. The months that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. Cecilia continued teaching, though she now rode to the schoolhouse each morning on horseback, a skill Quinn patiently taught her. In the afternoons, she would return home to work on their cabin and land. They planted a garden, fixed up fences, slowly improved their little homestead. Quinn worked long days on Mr. Dalton's ranch, but always came home to Cecilia. They would have dinner together, talking about their days, making plans for the future. At night, they would lie in bed and dream aloud about the life they were building. Winter came, bringing cold winds and occasional snow to the high country around Williams. The schoolhouse was harder to heat, and some days Cecilia dismissed the children early when the temperature dropped too low. But she persevered, and the children continued to learn and grow. Her relationship with the town had settled into something approaching normalcy. Most people had accepted her, though there were still a few, led by Mrs. Whitmore, who remained coldly disapproving. But their opinions mattered less and less to Cecilia. She had Quinn, she had her students, she had her home. That was enough. In January, Cecilia realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first she dismissed it as stress or the cold, but when a second month passed, she began to suspect the truth. She confided in Martha, who confirmed her suspicions with a knowing smile. "You are with child, dear. How wonderful!" Cecilia was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure. A baby. She was going to have a baby with Quinn. She worried about how to tell him, wanting the moment to be special, but in the end, she blurted it out one evening over dinner. "I am pregnant." Quinn's fork clattered to his plate. He stared at her, eyes wide. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation." "But yes, I am certain." A slow smile spread across Quinn's face, growing wider and wider until he was grinning like a fool. He stood, came around the table, and pulled her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby. Cecilia, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" She asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy, I am ecstatic, I do not even have words." He kissed her soundly. "You have given me everything, Cecilia. A home, a future, and now a child. I love you so much." They held each other, both of them laughing and crying at once, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift they had been given. Cecilia continued teaching through the spring. though as her pregnancy advanced, it became more difficult. The children were sweet about it, offering to help her with tasks that required bending or reaching. Some of the mothers who had been skeptical of her before softened when they learned she was expecting, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. In April, Cecilia finally had to stop teaching, her advanced pregnancy making the daily ride to the schoolhouse too difficult. The school board, with Mrs. Whitmore outvoted, agreed to hold her position for her return after the baby was born. The final months of her pregnancy were spent preparing. Quinn built a cradle, working on it in the evenings with patient care. Cecilia sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they would give their child. On a hot July evening in 1883, Cecilia went into labor. Martha came to help along with Dr. Peterson from town. Quinn paced outside, too anxious to sit still. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Cecilia wondered if she would survive it. But finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, she heard a baby's cry. "It is a boy," Martha announced, placing the tiny, squalling infant in Cecilia's arms. A beautiful, healthy boy. Cecilia looked down at her son, at his red face and tiny fists, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Quinn came in then, his face haggard with worry, but when he saw them both alive and well, tears streamed down his face. "A son," he whispered, sitting beside the bed and reaching out to touch the baby's soft head. "We have a son." They named him Henry, after Quinn's father, and he was everything to them. Quinn was a devoted father from the very beginning, changing nappies and walking the floor with Henry when he cried at night. Cecilia had never seen him happier. She returned to teaching that fall, bringing Henry with her. The children were enchanted with the baby, and the older girls would take turns holding him when he got fussy. It was unconventional, but it worked. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. Their homestead prospered, Quinn's hard work and careful management paying off. They added more land, more cattle, built a larger house to replace the tiny cabin. Henry grew from a baby to a toddler to a bright, curious boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. In 1885, Cecilia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Anna after Cecilia's mother. She had Quinn's dark hair and Cecilia's blue eyes, and she was fearless from the moment she could walk. 2 years later came another son, James, who was quiet and thoughtful like his father. Williams grew and changed around them. The railroad brought more people, more businesses. The town that had once been wary of Cecilia now embraced her as one of their own. She continued teaching, shaping young minds and helping children discover their potential. Some of her earliest students grew up and had children of their own who sat in her classroom. Mrs. Whitmore eventually moved away, her husband having taken a position at a bank in Flagstaff. Cecilia could not say she was sorry to see her go, though she tried to be charitable about it. The woman had been operating from her own fears and prejudices, and Cecilia had learned that such people were to be pitied more than hated. Quinn's ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the area. He hired hands to help with the work, but he never lost his own work ethic, always willing to get his hands dirty alongside his men. He was respected in the community, known as a fair man and a good neighbor. Sarah remained one of Cecilia's closest friends, their children playing together and their families sharing holidays and celebrations. Martha Henderson became like a grandmother to their children, always ready with cookies and stories and unconditional love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Cecilia back to the creek where he had first kissed her. They sat on the same rock, watching the water flow by, and he took her hand in his. "You ever regret it?" he asked. Staying here, building this life. Never, Cecilia said firmly. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. With you, with our children in this place we have made our own. I think about that day sometimes, when I first saw you getting off the stagecoach. You looked so lost and so brave at the same time. I knew then that you were someone special. I did not feel special. I felt terrified. But you did not let that stop you. You kept going, kept trying, even when people were cruel. That takes real strength. Cecilia leaned her head on his shoulder. I had help. I had you standing up for me, believing in me when no one else did. You saved me, Quinn. No, he said gently. We saved each other. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the creek and the wind in the cottonwoods, and Cecilia reflected on how much her life had changed. She had come to Williams expecting hardship, expecting to have to fight for every inch of acceptance. And while that had been true at first, she had found something so much more valuable. She had found love, community, purpose. She had found home. Henry started school when he was 6, sitting in his mother's classroom with the other children. He was a good student, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Anna followed 2 years later, more interested in playing than learning, but bright enough when she applied herself. James would join them soon, and Cecilia found joy in teaching her own children alongside the others. The world beyond Williams continued to change. The Wild West was becoming less wild, more settled. There were still cattle drives and cowboys, but also telephones and electric lights in the bigger cities. The future was arriving, bringing new possibilities and new challenges. In 1893, when Cecilia was 33 years old, she gave birth to their 4th and final child, another daughter they named Sarah after Cecilia's dear friend. This baby was a surprise, coming 10 years after James, but she was loved no less for being unexpected. By then, Henry was 10 and already helping his father on the ranch during school breaks. He had Quinn's steady nature and Cecilia's love of learning, a combination that served him well. Anna was 8 and wild as the desert wind, always climbing trees or racing horses when she should have been doing chores. James was 6 and content to sit for hours watching ants or clouds or anything else that caught his interest. The children all spoke perfect English, but Cecilia made sure they learned Swedish as well, teaching them the language of her homeland in the evenings. She told them stories of Sweden, of snow-covered forests and midnight sun, of the grandmother they had never met, but who would have loved them dearly. Quinn encouraged this, understanding how important it was that the children know where they came from. He himself learned some Swedish, enough to understand when Cecilia spoke it, though his pronunciation was terrible and made her laugh. The schoolhouse eventually became too small for the growing population of Williams, and the town built a new, larger school. Cecilia helped plan it, making sure there was plenty of light and space for the children to learn. She continued teaching there until 1895, when she decided to step back and focus on her own children and the ranch. Her retirement from teaching was marked by a celebration in the town square. Former students, now grown, came to thank her for the education she had given them. Parents spoke about how she had changed their children's lives. Even the new teacher, a young woman from back east, thanked her for setting such a high standard. Cecilia was moved to tears by the outpouring of love and respect. This town that had once mocked her accent, that had wanted to drive her away, was now honoring her as one of their most valued members. It was a validation beyond anything she could have imagined. In her speech, she talked about the importance of acceptance and kindness, about looking past surface differences to see the heart of a person. She talked about second chances and the power of love to transform lives. And she talked about Quinn, her husband of 13 years, who had seen value in her when others saw only flaws. Quinn stood at the edge of the crowd, holding little Sarah in his arms, and when their eyes met, the love that passed between them was as strong as it had been that first day by the creek. The years continued to roll by, bringing the turn of the century and a new era. The Wild West of Cecilia's arrival was gone, replaced by something more civilized but also, in some ways, less free. The vast open ranges were being fenced in, the great cattle drives were ending, the rough edges of frontier life were being smoothed away. But on their ranch outside Williams, life continued in its rhythms. The cattle still needed tending, the garden still needed planting, the children still needed raising. Quinn and Cecilia worked side by side, their partnership as strong in middle age as it had been in youth. Henry grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch work as Quinn's back began to protest the hard labor of his younger years. At 18, Henry was already thinking about his own future, about taking over the ranch someday or perhaps buying land of his own. Anna surprised everyone by developing an interest in medicine, inspired by Dr. Peterson, who still made his rounds in Williams. She talked about going to nursing school, about helping people the way the doctor had helped her family over the years. It was an unusual ambition for a young woman, but Quinn and Cecilia supported her dreams. James wanted to be a teacher like his mother, patient and thoughtful and good with children. Cecilia thought he would be excellent at it, and she helped him with his studies, preparing him for the education he would need. Little Sarah, who was not so little anymore at 7 years old, had not yet decided what she wanted to be when she grew up, but she had plenty of time to figure it out. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Sarah and her husband came, along with their 4 children. Other friends and neighbors joined them. There was food and music and laughter. And as Cecilia looked around at the life they had built, at the people they loved and who loved them in return, she felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, Quinn and Cecilia sat on the porch of their house, watching the stars come out over the dark shapes of the mountains. 20 years, Quinn said, shaking his head in wonder. It has gone so fast. And yet when I think back to who we were then, it feels like a lifetime ago. We were young and foolish and brave, Quinn said, smiling. We did not know what we were getting into. Would you do it differently if you could? Not a single thing. He took her hand and raised it to his lips. You are still the best decision I ever made, Cecilia. Your voice is still the sweetest sound I know. She laughed, remembering those words he had spoken so long ago, words that had changed everything. I love you, Quinn Xavier. Thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me when everyone else only saw what they wanted to see. Thank you for letting me, he replied. Thank you for building this life with me. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new sorrows. But they would face it together as they had faced everything for 20 years. Inside the house, their children slept safe and warm. On the land around them, their cattle grazed peacefully. In the town beyond, the life they had helped build continued its steady rhythm. And in the vast starlit sky above, the future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. The years continued their steady march. In 1903, Henry married a sweet girl named Elizabeth from a neighboring ranch, and they settled on a piece of land Quinn and Cecilia gave them as a wedding present. The following year, they made Quinn and Cecilia grandparents for the first time with the birth of a healthy baby boy they named Quincy, after his grandfather. The first time Quinn held his grandson, tears streamed down his weathered face. "I never thought I would have this," he whispered to Cecilia. "After losing my family, I thought that was it for me. But look at what we have created together. Look at this legacy." Anna did indeed go to nursing school in Flagstaff, one of the first women from Williams to pursue such an education. She worked hard and graduated near the top of her class, then returned to Williams to work alongside Dr. Peterson. She never married, content with her work and her independence, and Cecilia was proud of her daughter's strength and determination. James became a teacher as he had dreamed, taking over the schoolhouse where his mother had taught for so many years. He was patient and kind with his students, just as Cecilia had been, and parents praised his dedication and skill. He married a quiet girl named Margaret who loved books as much as he did, and they had 3 children who filled their house with noise and laughter. Sarah, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by falling in love with ranching. She spent every spare moment working alongside her father and brother, learning the business from the ground up. At 16, she could rope and ride as well as any cowboy on the payroll, and she had a head for the financial side of things that impressed even Quinn. In 1910, Quinn fell ill with pneumonia. For 3 terrifying weeks, he lay in bed struggling to breathe while Cecilia nursed him and Anna used all her medical knowledge to keep him alive. The whole family gathered, fearing the worst, but Quinn was not ready to go yet. Slowly, stubbornly, he recovered, though the illness left him weaker than before. After that scare, Quinn and Cecilia made some changes. They officially signed the ranch over to Henry and Sarah to run together, trusting them to continue the legacy they had built. Quinn still helped out when he could, but the daily burden of running the operation fell to younger shoulders. It gave Quinn and Cecilia time to simply be together, to enjoy the life they had created without the constant pressure of work. They took walks, tended a smaller garden near the house, spent time with their growing collection of grandchildren. Quinn taught the oldest ones to rope and ride, passing on skills that had been passed to him. Cecilia read to the younger ones, opened their minds to worlds beyond Williams. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch and remember. They talked about that first day when Quinn had helped her with her trunk, about the kindness in his eyes that had given her hope. They remembered their wedding, the joy of Henry's birth, the struggles and triumphs of building their ranch. They remembered friends they had lost and celebrated those who remained. "You ever think about going back?" Quinn asked one evening in 1915. They were both in their 50s now, their hair graying, their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work. "To Sweden, I mean, to see where you came from." Cecilia considered the question. She had not seen her homeland in over 30 years, and sometimes she missed it with an ache that took her breath away. But when she thought about actually returning, even for a visit, it did not feel right. "This is my home now," she said finally. "Sweden is where I came from, but Williams is where I belong. My life is here, with you and our children and grandchildren. I would not trade that for anything." Quinn nodded, satisfied with her answer. "I am glad. I do not know what I would do without you." "You will never have to find out," she said firmly. "We are together until the end, you and I." It was a promise she intended to keep. They had faced everything together, joy and sorrow, success and failure, and she could not imagine navigating the world without him by her side. In 1917, the world changed again when America entered the Great War in Europe. Henry's oldest son, young Quincy, enlisted despite his parents' protests. He was 19 and idealistic, convinced he could make a difference. Cecilia remembered being that young, that certain of her place in the world, and her heart ached for him. They sent him off with prayers and tears, and for 2 years they waited anxiously for news. Letters came sporadically, describing conditions Cecilia could barely comprehend. When the war finally ended in 1918 and Quincy came home, he was changed, quieter and more serious, haunted by things he would not speak of. But he was alive, and for that they were grateful. The 1920s brought prosperity to the ranch and to Williams. The railroad continued to bring growth and opportunity, and the town that had been a rough frontier settlement when Cecilia arrived was now a thriving community with paved streets and electric lights and all the modern conveniences. Quinn and Cecilia watched these changes with mixed feelings. Progress was good, but something had been lost too, some wildness and freedom that had characterized the old days. Still, they adapted as they always had, finding joy in the new while honoring the old. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923, the family threw them a grand celebration. All 4 of their children were there with their families, 12 grandchildren in total ranging from age 19 down to just a few months old. Friends and neighbors came from all over, filling the ranch house and spilling out into the yard. Cecilia wore a new dress for the occasion, pale blue with lace at the collar, and someone had fashioned her a corsage of desert flowers. Quinn wore his best suit, his silver hair neatly combed, and he stood tall and proud beside her as people offered congratulations and well wishes. Henry gave a speech, talking about the example his parents had set, about the love and dedication that had sustained them through 4 decades. Anna spoke about her mother's courage in coming to a new country and making a place for herself. James talked about his father's quiet strength and unwavering integrity. Sarah, fighting back tears, simply said that she hoped to be half as good a person as either of her parents. When it was Cecilia's turn to speak, she looked out at the faces gathered before her, at the life she and Quinn had built together, and she struggled to find words adequate to express what she felt. 40 years ago, she finally said, her Swedish accent still present though softened by decades of speaking English. I came to Williams as a stranger. I was alone and frightened and certain that I had made a terrible mistake. But then I met a man who saw past my accent, past my foreignness, to the person I was inside. He told me my voice was the sweetest sound he knew, and with those words he gave me hope. She turned to Quinn, tears streaming down her face. You gave me everything, my love. A home, a family, a life beyond anything I dared to dream, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Quinn pulled her close and kissed her forehead, and the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. It was a perfect moment, one Cecilia would treasure for the rest of her days. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. Quinn's health continued to decline slowly, his body wearing out after decades of hard work. By 1928, he needed a cane to walk, and by 1930, he rarely left the house. Cecilia tended to him patiently, repaying the care he had always shown her. On a cool October evening in 1932, just days after their 49th wedding anniversary, Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep with Cecilia holding his hand. He was 77 years old, and he had lived a full, rich life. The funeral was one of the largest Williams had ever seen. People came from all over the territory, former ranch hands and business associates and friends from 5 decades of living in the community. They spoke about Quinn's fairness, his generosity, his quiet strength. They talked about the legacy he left behind in his children and grandchildren and the thriving ranch that bore his name. Cecilia bore it all with dignity, though inside she felt as though her heart had been torn in two. Quinn had been her partner, her love, her best friend for nearly 50 years. The thought of continuing without him seemed impossible, but she did continue, because that was what he would have wanted. She lived on at the ranch, surrounded by family, watching her grandchildren grow and begin families of their own. She became a great-grandmother in 1935, holding the tiny baby and marveling at the generations that had sprung from that chance meeting in Williams so long ago. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and talk to Quinn as if he were still there. She told him about the children, about the ranch, about the changes in the world. She remembered their life together, every precious moment, and she felt grateful beyond measure for the years they had shared. In 1940, at the age of 80, Cecilia Barrett Xavier passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her children. She was buried beside Quinn in the Williams Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read "Beloved wife, mother, and teacher." At her funeral, her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to celebrate her life. They talked about her courage in leaving everything she knew to build a new life in a foreign land. They spoke of her dedication to education, the hundreds of children whose lives she had touched. They remembered her kindness, her strength, her unwavering love for family. But mostly, they talked about the love story that had sustained her and Quinn through nearly 5 decades together. A love that had begun when a kind cowboy had defended a lonely immigrant and told her that her voice was the sweetest sound he knew. That love had created a legacy that would endure for generations, a testament to the power of seeing past differences to the heart of a person, of choosing kindness over cruelty, acceptance over prejudice. It was a story worth remembering, worth passing down, worth celebrating. And in the hearts of everyone who had known Quinn and Cecilia Xavier, that love would never die. It would live on in the values they had instilled, the family they had created, and the example they had set. They had shown that love could overcome any obstacle, bridge any divide, and create something beautiful and lasting. In Williams, Arizona, the ranch they had built still stood, now run by the 4th generation of their family. The schoolhouse where Cecilia had taught had been replaced by a modern building, but a plaque on the wall honored her as one of the town's founding educators. And in the cemetery on the hill, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of a Swedish immigrant and the cowboy who had loved her. Their story became part of the town's history, told and retold, inspiring others who felt like outsiders, who struggled to find their place. It reminded people that home was not just a place, but the people you loved and who loved you in return. It showed that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was open your heart to someone different from yourself. And on quiet desert nights, when the wind blew through the cottonwoods by the creek, some swore they could hear echoes of laughter and whispered words of love, the voices of Quinn and Cecilia Xavier, together still in the land they had made their own. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived in Williams, carrying forward the legacy of courage and love that had begun with a woman who dared to cross an ocean, and a man who recognized something precious when he heard it. The Xavier name was respected throughout Arizona, synonymous with integrity and hard work and family values. And though the Wild West of their youth was long gone, replaced by highways and modern conveniences, the essential truths they had lived by remained as relevant as ever. That love mattered more than circumstance, that kindness could change lives, and that everyone deserved to be seen for who they truly were, regardless of how they sounded or where they came from. It was a simple story in many ways, just 2 people who found each other and built a life together. But it was also an extraordinary one, a reminder that the most powerful force in the world was not violence or hatred but love, freely given and gratefully received. Quinn and Cecilia Xavier had lived that truth every day of their lives together, and in doing so, they had created something that would outlast them both. A family, a legacy, and a love story for the ages.